Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Tofarides. She's an author and a modern languages teacher with a doctorate in political social sciences. She published a book, Urban Policy in the European Union, a multi-level gatekeeper system, which compares comparative study of London and Marseille. She's currently doing research in Cyprus on governance and judiciary, and an anticipatory plug. The book is
Thank you to everyone for being here today, and thank you to Alicia and John for inviting me. This isn't my subject area. I deal more with urban and regional policy, but I seem to fit in the themes today for various reasons. I'm a Cypriot woman, born in Cyprus, but brought up abroad. And I also have an Irish husband, so that fits in with yesterday. And I was brought up in London, so that's like three themes that fit into the conference. So that's my start. This isn't my policy area, but I'd like to speak a little bit about my experiences. And starting as a displaced person, we came in 63, 64. And there's another personal side I'd like to add to this. My late mother, in the 1950s, when she gave birth to my brother, I remember her telling me the story that she lived very happily with Turkish Cypriot neighbours, and she breastfed a Turkish Cypriot child whose mother had no milk, and obviously created a bond. And throughout her life, she always wondered what happened to that little boy because of the communal problems afterwards. They lost touch. So that's the sort of personal side of coming over. And well, we came here, and I was brought up, another slant, I was brought up in Islington and went to school in Highbury, so I'm a local girl as well in that respect. So I fit in the various things, and generally lived in the UK, went to university, went to grammar school, did this 11+, didn't really know what it was, but I ended up in a grammar school, hybrid or high school. And I had these opportunities which got me to Manchester University, and then I went to Birmingham, I did teaching. Then I got bored because I found that when I was promoted I was taken out of the classroom, which is what I like doing. So I went back to political science. I went to the London School of Economics, and then I got a grant from the UK government, which I'm very grateful, to do my doctorate. And one thing which I applauded from the UK government side is that unlike other countries which had pre-selection committees, we applied directly to the institute, who looked at our research proposals, decided who would get an interview, and then decided who would get the place. Now, unfortunately, in countries like Spain and possibly Greece, there's a little bit of a pre-selection committee which brings out the rispetti, the transparency that we were talking about yesterday. So that's, I mean, I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had here. So now I'm going to talk about my own reflections of Cyprus, and basically from when I was young and visiting Cyprus to going back there in 2010, because my late mother's wedding present consisted of property in rather desirable areas, although we didn't know at the time, by the sea and the coast and this sort of thing. And things happened. So in 2010 I had to go and deal hands-on with these things, again related unfortunately to wrongdoing, but that's the book, that's separate. Today I'm going to talk about how I felt as a child being brought up here, and reflections from 2010. So we'll start with my childhood, when I used to go to Baralimni, which is where my mother's from, and they also had a farm in the Famagusta area. And basically I'd be packaged off there in the holidays because they ran a restaurant on City Road, couldn't look after us, so they sent us to Cyprus. And it was really exciting, and seeing farm life and animals, and well, my uncle didn't get electricity until 73, so that was really exciting, running around in the dark and playing with torches and ambajur, the lights and this sort of thing. And basically that was the side which is how my mother was brought up, very traditional farmers. We come from farmers on my mother's side, and we experienced that kind of life of, you know, if you wanted a chicken, my auntie would go and pick one, my grandmother would pick the fattest pigeon to make me soup, and this kind of traditional farming life, which bread baked in the traditional ovens, washing clothes out in the land. If we wanted to have a bath, there'd be the big tin bath, and Auntie would boil the water, and we'd have external toilets. You know, this sort of rural life, which was really exciting to someone being brought up on city roads, suddenly being transplanted into a completely different environment, a rural environment, similar to my mother's when she was brought up, and halloumi, again homemade, everything organic and everything. So, and we would go to the village grocer, but there was just one in Baralimni, and do our shopping. And also I remember going with my aunt, my late grandmother, to the Bandobolio, because basically when we farmed, we'd have tomatoes, cucumbers, they'd go to the Bandobolio to sell, and then from then on, if the late grandparents made a profit, they would buy more land, which we're dealing with today. So I'm talking equality between the sexes. If we look at it in those things, it seemed fairly equal in terms of agricultural work in those days, because aunties and uncles worked on the land. But I thought women had a little bit of a raw deal, because they also had to do the cooking and deal with the children and elderly relatives and things like this. And men got to go hunting and fishing, and they could swim, and women tended to not be allowed to swim. My mother never learned to swim, even though she spent most of her life within 100 metres of the beach. So they didn't learn to swim, and then men would be allowed out to go to the Gafenio every night. They were allowed to sort of go and chat with other men, usually along party lines. But women were quite happy going to each other's houses, zmili, embroidery and this sort of thing, and we would just run and play with dolls and whatever. So wonderful. This was up until the war. And basically education opportunities. Well, my late mother had to leave school by the age of 11 because she had to help on the farm. There was no question. I'm talking now rural. I mean, obviously in cities it could have been different. My father did go to the Pancreprium Gymnasium, but he was from Gaimagli, so different. And another strange thing was that they actually got together in those days, because most people married someone from their village. But apparently my late grandparents had a pig farm in Famagusta, and we're getting to the Broxenia because my grandmother saw this lady and decided she would be a good wife for my father, got them together. He didn't ask for any property because he was an army contractor and not interested in peasantry and farming and things, and Grandad thought great. But then again, he gave my mother some property anyway, which is why I've been going back to Cyprus today, which is another story. But Broxenia, religion, this was the Cyprus that I experienced as a child, even though I'm not so old, seems from a different era. And even in the 1980s, I experienced something like this, which was really strange, because I went to Manchester University, where I was going to clubs and partying with all the punk era and the hacienda and this sort of thing. And then I'd go to Cyprus, and the excursion there, I mean, I couldn't behave like going to nightclubs there unless chaperoned by a male relative. And basically you would have what they called the nifobazaro. You weren't allowed to be dating. Every Sunday in Baralimni, they'd be allowed out, and then you would, my cousins would see someone that they liked, and they would see if they liked this person, and then the families would get them together, and they would literally just go up and down in Baralimni streets every Sunday. So this was what they called it, as I said. And if you liked someone, you had to give your logo, as in, you know, you would marry them. And this is a bit of a sore point in my family, because going back another generation, my late mother told me my late uncle had been taken, he'd probably be annoyed for revealing this, had been taken for breach of promise to court, which cost my grandfather quite a lot of money, but that was back in the 1930s or 40s, whatever it was. So anyway, but even in the 1980s, you had this thing you had to give your loyastigen. They were agreeing to marry, and a couple of my cousins, well, they met their partners abroad when they went off to study in Greece, where they did go out and have dinner and date, as it were. As soon as they got back to Cyprus, they swam to the island in Brodaras. They were seen by everyone. Next minute, loyastiga, and eventually they had to go back engaged, aragones, and married. So again, completely different to me as a Cypriot who was going there in the 80s and experiencing, was thinking, well, this isn't really fair, because it seems the males could go out and hang around with Scandinavian ladies or tourists, and this was all okay, but the women couldn't. The women had to be respectable, and if you did go to a disco in Ayanaba, you had to go with your cousin and be sort of stay with them. You couldn't just wander off, So, and so that was the other strange thing. And apart from that, when I finished university, which was about 85, and then I did teacher training, and I went back. And, well, all that was finished. All my cousins were married, so I had no one to go out with. So I was not allowed. And I certainly couldn't go out by myself. And basically, then I was subjected to, oh yes, come for a meal. And then suddenly someone would appear that they were trying to introduce me to. But it wasn't Broxenia. I didn't have to do anything. But I had to sit there and be polite and go along, and then I said, no thanks, and they said, well, there's something wrong with your daughter, too educated, won't get married, oh dear. So my parents had a lot of grief, I'm afraid, with that sort of too much education is no good. So it seemed the beginning of the idea of, education is good, and my parents were sort of happy that they'd educated me, as it were, but on the other hand, there was this thing that somehow didn't quite fit, because I wasn't conforming to their society, so that caused quite a lot of strain, particularly with my late mother, who was the Baralimnidi, maybe less so from my father, being from Gaimatli, but definitely from my mother it sort of caused strain. So, worse still, when it came to later on, I was in my 30s, and much to my mother's horror, I decided to leave my job teaching, because I didn't want to be out of the classroom, and they kept promoting me, so I thought, I don't like this, I like kids. So I went to the LSE and I did my master's, and that's how I ended up doing the doctorate, because I had this research proposal about London. And actually, another reason why I did that then, which I think was the right time, is because when I did European studies back in the 80s, it was very much sort of IR type dimension. Whereas after 1992, Europe was getting into normal lives much more, so that promoted my interest. So that's why I sort of looked at regional policy and urban policy, and was told there's no urban policy, but there was in the framework of regional policy. So I ended up wandering about the streets of Marseille, where the police wouldn't go except to pick up a dead body, and streets in East London and northwest London, Queen's Park, deprived areas, community regeneration. So that was that side of the thing, and I didn't actually marry until after all that, when I met my husband by chance, strangely enough in an Israeli bank in London, and he's Irish. So don't ask me how that happened, but we had friends, and I ended up at a party at this bank and met my husband, and he's Irish. So I did marry eventually, but by the time I married, a lot of my contemporaries were grandparents. They married sort of a long time ago. So that kind of didn't match either, because I can't sort of communicate, because their kids are studying and my kids were young or still at school, and I was sort of like a generation out of sync, as it were. But anyway, so that's the other thing I had to deal with. So now we get back to 2010, and because of all this property that fortunately or unfortunately inherited, things were happening, and I couldn't understand it from over here. I'd been dealing with it since 2007 and felt I had to go there. So I bullied my husband into retiring, dragged him to Cyprus and from the police, but he ended up retiring from the police but studying law, because that's another dimension. We discovered that we actually had to know the law to be able to deal with what was going on, because we were told all sorts of things. And I was inspired also by Gleakos and his rule of law. And so along the road, I'm very grateful to ideas, because I've been following Alicia and since 2003 when Cyprus University came. I've never actually presented, but I've absorbed. So hopefully I'm giving something back now by actually presenting something. So I went back in 2010 and things had changed basically. Paralimni was no longer so rural. You had more women working in different areas, government, education, maybe with teachers, service industry, lots of banks, as we spoke about, property development, selling houses. There was more affluence. You didn't see people, as I witnessed my aunties scrubbing the clothes in the yard anymore. We had washing machines, dishwashers, white goods, luxury houses. So I didn't see any of the traditional sort of scrubbing and weaving and things. But I did see another side, which a little bit more disturbing. What I call the underclass of live-in domestic workers. So while many women worked and have these machines and things to help them, to quote Elisa Savido, Commissioner of Demonstration and Human Rights, about 30,000 domestic workers in Cyprus, mostly women, with very low salaries of 314 euros a month set by law. So that's quite disturbing. And I mean, I have seen these women work and carrying rubbish, working long hours, unregulated. So my only concern was, is this sort of emancipation of women and going into the workplace at the expense of an underclass of women from other parts of the world who end up doing the domestic work? So this was what began to worry me in looking at things. And I think also it hit on issues about equality in Cypriot society as well, which as again observations, because many women are in senior positions, but this comes back to a little bit what we were talking about, so Rusfeti, transparency, networks, because some may have gained their positions. I'm not saying, I haven't done a scientific study on this, but some appointments might be related to clientelism, party politics. Some of the women may have reached their position in this way. We don't know for sure because there isn't really freedom of information and transparency and the influence of the parties. And I've noticed many, many female lawyers, but most of them are in family firms. So you go to law school in England and then you work for mum and dad, which can take the strain off things because, you know, oh dad, I'm meeting my friend for coffee, so off they go. So I've seen this as well, you know, there's something really urgent that needs to be done, but they go for coffee. So how radical are the professional women in Cyprus? This is something that I'd like to raise a question. Are they forward thinkers or hiding behind the patriarchal society that you mentioned with established networks and practices? And if they question this, could that jeopardize their own social standing within Cypriot society? You know, I might say something that would upset dad or his friends or whatever, or the family. So that was my question. And also, equality between the sexes. Something else that I've seen, I have relatives, for example, whose mothers and mother-in-laws do all the cooking. Then they have domestic servants doing everything at home, and so they work, but everything is virtually done for them. And then I'm sort of thinking, well, what happens when your mother-in-law and your mother can't do that because they need care? So then you have to reverse the care and manage the work. And also, what happens if you didn't have domestic workers? So, and could it be that having all this help, either from other generations or from domestic workers, is means that the males are perhaps not helping as much as they could, even in terms of parenting? How much are the males actively engaging with their children? Because I've often seen, for example, at the beach, you have the maid playing with the kids or entertaining them in the sea, and the parents are sipping frappes. That's when they can take the maid with them if they have a secondary home. If they have to pay a hotel and they can't afford to put up the maid, then you see these really grumpy men with pushchairs. And I'm thinking, you're grumpy because you actually have to do something for a change. So I'm just sort of sitting there in Verinia, there's a souvlaki place out there, and as I have my souvlaki sometimes with my family and friends or whatever, I'm sort of observing this in the summer, which you don't see in the winter, when the Nicosians and the other people come to the coast. So anyway, this is worrying about future generations, because if you're having children that haven't actually engaged with their parents, then that worries you about what sorts of children we're producing for the future and what relationships they're going to have with their own parents when they get old, and going back to this circle. I mean, life's not easy, but it's just seems, you know, we can substitute and make it easy, but are we sort of creating problems for the future? And the other thing, as I said, how many can they struggle without this and reconcile? And also, alongside to this is relying on domestic labour, but then there's the economic crisis. So sometimes one of the partners loses their job, so they might not be able to afford the maid, but they've got used to, you know, ways of working. And work itself, as Penelope pointed out, can become more demanding. Because we can see changes in performance-related pay, for example, in the civil service, which is now being discussed. It's no longer safe to go to work. You just go to work and you're safe and you'll be promoted because you've been there a long time. I think that's changing in Cyprus now. People are looking, you know, how many cases have you covered? What have you done? Accountability, semi-governmental companies, they might be privatized. And then, again, that's going to cause changes. Your boss could be German. You might have to learn a new language if a German or a French company. I remember teaching French to employees of water many years ago, because the French were buying up all the water, and then suddenly everyone had to speak French, so they needed lessons. So I can see these sorts of pressures and changes as well from the cosy environments, which Penelope touched on as well. And divorce, in the days when I visited Cyprus as a child, I'm not saying everyone was happy, but even if they weren't, they didn't dare get divorced. It was quite rare. But now it's more common, and we've had reports of sexual harassment of domestic workers in the workplace, the home. And according to Savido, in a recent conference in Cyprus Mail, quoted September 2014, she said, domestic workers are not given the ability to organise collectively, strike or demand better work conditions, and they face deportation if they report a dispute or sexual harassment while being barred from changing employers during an investigation by the authorities. So obviously it's not good. It's happening, but it's very, very difficult. And other incidences of marital breakdown, sometimes I've seen cases where the husband runs off with a domestic worker, and sometimes just arrival of workers in bars, for example, from other parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, which was not so easily available. So men starting second families, older men, younger partners. I haven't seen so much of the reverse, females forming second families with non-Cypriots. And to be perfectly honest, my husband is very, very fair, and we did marry in the Greek church and everything, even though he's Catholic, he agreed to go along with it. And when we go to church, he always sort of whispers in my ear, watch this, and I hate to say it, but him being very fair, me being dark, the children kind of looking a bit like him, but having dark skin because they've taken after me, attracts stares. And I always feel that the men with the wives from other countries don't get the stares that I get, so I'm thinking, why? So it's just something. I mean, I'm talking now about Paralimni and Famagusta. I'm not saying it could be different in Nicosia, which is much more international environment. And the other thing, domestic violence is another side that we haven't seen. Association Prevention and Handling of Violence. Nearly 2,000 calls received about incidents of physical, psychological and sexual violence. The majority were women, 83%, but over 100 of the calls involved domestic violence against children. And this was Joseph Pierre Antonio in the Cyprus Mail said, All right, I'm finishing now. The phenomenon of violence against women, which plagues modern societies, is mainly caused by historically unequal relations between men and women, not only in Cyprus but also in Europe. 1 in 5 women experiences physical violence at least once during their adult life. At least 1 in 10 experience sexual abuse. Josephine Andonio, Equality Commissioner. So basically, these are the various things for thoughts that I wanted to raise. That on the one hand, we have progress, but there are these other sides, and the whole point, it's not a scientific study, purely observations of personal experience, but hopefully it can promote more discussion and research by social scientists and academics who work in these fields. It's just a taster. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's 4 very stimulating talks.